Hey guys, so today I decided that I'm going to talk about some books that I grew up with. So these are just like a short list of books that stuck with me through over the years, and you can kind of see where I started with my reading. And this is going to be like a list from elementary school to like the end of middle school. So first we have The Littlest Angel by Charles Tazewell, and this is a book that seems kind of morbid to start off with, but this is the first book I ever remember being read to me, and it's about a child dying. Yeah! Then we have Oh, the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss. I'm sure this is something that is a favorite from everybody's childhood because it talks about so many things in so little words in a way that only Dr. Seuss could pull off, and this one has been a favorite for forever. And then we have the book that always made my mom cry, which is The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein, because it's a sad book and I didn't understand why it was sad at the end that made my mom cry until I was much older. So this is kind of complicated and intricate in a way that only children's books can be, that you don't really fully understand until you're way older, and then it hits you and you're like, oh. And then we have Reckless Ruby. I put this one on the list because it was given to me by my first grade teacher because I was a reckless child, and she thought of me when she was buying books for us at the end of the year. So naturally, I've just remembered that for forever. So it's about a girl who goes on a bunch of adventures, and she kind of doesn't really, she cares about the consequences, but it's like they almost don't affect her because she's invincible, essentially, because she's just got this great sense of adventure. And I don't know whether I'm proud or insulted that the word reckless perfectly described me in elementary school. And then the next book is the first one I ever picked out for myself, which is What About My Goldfish? And this book by Pamela D. Greenwood was influential to me when I was in elementary school because my family was moving houses, and this is a story about a boy who is moving and he's worried about obviously his goldfish, but also like the rest of his life and his friends, and like how is it going to be being the new kid in school where he doesn't know the rules. So this kind of came to me at a time in my life where I was transitioning from school to school, so I really connected with this one when I was younger. And then we have Sideways Stories from Wayside School. I loved these books when I was younger just because they're so wacky and weird, and at the time different than anything else I'd ever read because I hadn't really had a reading repertoire yet. But I remember really enjoying these and just laughing at all of the weird characters and things that seemed so impossible. And I don't know, I just really remember enjoying this entire series. I picked up practically all of them from the school library and read them cover to cover in an afternoon. And then we have How to Eat Fried Worms by Thomas Rockwell. And this book is a personal favorite just because the movie was adorable, but before the movie ever came out, my grandfather would read this to me when I was in elementary school, and I just remember him imitating all the characters' voices and laughing because he did not sound like a 9-year-old child. This book is about young kids, and again, it's a new kid moving to a new area. It's about him trying to make new friends and impressing them by eating fried worms. I don't know. I have a lot of good memories with reading this book, particularly because it's one of my clearest memories of spending time with my grandpa. And then the last book that I have on my elementary school part of this list, I was not a big reader in elementary school at all. I liked Wayside School, but then that was the only thing that I ever really liked, and it was because it was short and funny. I didn't really enjoy anything outside of that. And then this book, The Thief Lord by Cornelia Funk, came along because it was a required reading list for summer reading. I never would have picked it up myself because it is way too thick for elementary school me. I picked this book up off of the list because it sounded kind of interesting. It sounded the least horrible. And then I fell in love with this book so much that I actually ended up getting in trouble for reading in school and not paying attention to my schoolwork because I was always reading this book. I read it like 3 times over and over again because I loved it so much. It's about a bunch of runaway children in Italy, and they meet this guy Scipio, and he seems like this incredibly cool thief and they all look up to him. So it's about their friendship and their dependency on one another while they're like living this rogue life and they're on their own when they're children. And there's some fantasy aspects to this book as well, because there's a magical carousel when they want to be older, they want to be more responsible, but then I just get so twisted, and I loved it so much, and I still do. Now I'm gonna move into books that I read in my middle school era. So these are books that I read in the 6th grade, and they were really influential to me just because I started to really like art in middle school. And this is a combination of reading and illustration, essentially. And it's the Amelia Diaries series. I still have all of them just because I loved this so much growing up. I love Amelia, and I still do. Just because she was so relatable to a younger reader who was just kind of starting out and figuring out what they wanted out of books. Like in this one, she wants to go to space camp and learn how to be an astronaut. So I ended up asking my mom to go to space camp because it sounded amazing in her journals. And then there's one about family issues, which I thought was adorable. And then this one was like money management and figuring out what is worth working for and how to set your goals and how to work hard to get what you want. And then this one, All New Amelia, is about a popular girl who moves into her school and everybody wants to be like her, including Amelia, so she tries to reinvent herself to be a more interesting person, but it doesn't work because she's already great the way that she is, and her friends already like her, so she doesn't need to be this new and exciting person because she's good the way she is. A lot of good morals for a developing mind thrown into that series, and that's one of the reasons why it stuck with me for so long. And then I have some required reading that I had to do in middle school that I actually ended up liking, which gave me wrong expectations because I so do not like required readings anymore. But in middle school, they were actually not such bad selections. So I had On My Side of the Mountain by Jean Craighead George. And I don't know, I just kind of really liked the idea of living in the wilderness and like surviving off the land and being your own person away from everything else. And this got me interested in wilderness survival for a while. That was a phase that I did go through. And I tried to find some books at our school library about like how to cut wood and make a house in the middle of the forest. It didn't develop into anything, but I did make an effort. Okay, so next is another required reading list that I read in 6th grade, which is The Watsons Go to Birmingham in 1963 by Christopher Paul Curtis. And it's about a family that goes to Birmingham, Alabama, and it's about racism and segregation and a lot of historical aspects and how they affected a black family, which as a middle schooler, I had never really read about an entire black family before. I didn't read very diversely prior to this book because I didn't even know it was out there because I just read what was available to me, and this opened that door, which was really obviously very good because you start reading different things and get to know about different people. And then we have another book that's kind of on an iffy subject, and that is Speak by Lori Hulse Anderson. And if you do not know, this book is about sexual assault and this girl's survival through it and seeing her rapist in school every day and it tormenting her and no one is on her side. So it introduced me to the idea of victim blaming before I really even understood what sexual assault was because I was very naive. The first time I read this book, I didn't even understand what it was about because I couldn't wrap my head around what this person did to her because it's never really explicitly said. So I didn't understand why she was so upset because my mind didn't comprehend that someone could hurt you in this way. So this was my introduction to rape culture, essentially, but it was good because it opened my eyes the second time I read it, because the second time I read it, it was later. I think I reread it in high school, and then I understood what it meant because I was like, oh my god, that explains why I've had this bad feeling about that book. Like I knew it was something important and big that I didn't have any words for yet. And then when I reread it in high school as a freshman, I understood. But I didn't the first time I read it, but it did still open that door for me as a developing middle schooler, how to understand a situation like this and to look at it from the victim side and to try and understand them. rather than just group along with everybody else. And another racy read I read in middle school was V.C. Andrews and Flowers in the Attic. It's really messed up. If you've never read any V.C. Andrews before, don't if you're in middle school. This is about a family of children who get locked in their grandmother's attic because their mother doesn't want their grandfather to know that she had children with her cousin. They're all products of incest. So taboo. It's so taboo, and for such a good reason. This book is really messed up, and it talks a lot about psychological damage and trust and, again, sexual assault that I didn't really fully understand. Oh my god. What have I done to myself? A lighthearted aspect to my middle school reads is the Mates and Dates series by Cathy Hopkins, because I loved the series. This is actually a different one. This is a Truth or Dare series also by Cathy Hopkins, which is like an extended version of the Mates and Dates. But I reread these books a gazillion times because I loved them so much. They're about, or at least Mates and Dates, because this isn't the same series. I don't have any of the books left from that series that I love so much because I got them all from the library. This series is about a group of friends that just like, they were teenagers, so it was very intriguing to me to be reading about teenagers when I was in middle school because I wasn't like a real teenager yet. And I was excited about that prospect because of these books and like what it felt like was coming my way in my teenage years. None of it happened, but it was good to dream. And that's the important part. It was just about a group of friends who went through a lot of things together, and you just go on the story of them dealing with everyday life. Nothing too dramatic, there's no fantasy aspects to the story, but it's like their first romances and fad diets and why they're not effective, and body image and dating and how to maintain friendships and like boundaries kind of things. It's female friendships. It was a good start. The first fantasy series that I ever got really into was Pendragon. It's about a boy who has to save a bunch of different universes, or they're called territories, I think. And his uncle comes to him and says that it's your job to save these people. So he goes on all these adventures and all these different worlds, and he meets all these different people, and he sees life lived in ways that he can never imagine, and he has to solve all these problems. It was just, so good. So good. Read it. I recommend it. It's worth it. I promise. And then obviously Harry Potter, which I can't lug my entire set upstairs because that's way too much work. But Harry Potter, the first time I read the first book, I actually didn't like it. Well, I started reading Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone in middle school, but I didn't really like it because I was told that it was supposed to be about a boy who goes to a school for magic, and since I just started reading the Pendragon series, I really liked the idea of getting into more fantasy things, so magic sounded pretty intriguing. And then I started reading it, and it's about this kid who lives under the stairs, and I had a short attention span, so I didn't want to keep reading chapters if he wasn't at school already. Like, I did not have the patience to wait for the plot to thicken. I wanted to be there in the middle of the action already. I didn't want to wait. Don't yell at me. But when the movie came out for Sorcerer's Stone, then I was like, oh my god, this actually seems amazing. So I read it again, and I waited, and I reread it later, I promise, but I did skip a little bit until he got to the school, and then I started reading it, and then I've been reading it ever since, and it's one of my favorite and most influential books of my life. And another book I read in middle school that explains why I'm kind of really interested in social justice down the line, and this book introduced me to the idea of being transgender, even though that was never outright said in the book, and that is Luna. And that book was about a boy or a biological boy who was attempting to transition into the woman he believed that he was, and it's actually from her sister's point of view as she is transitioning into the person that she wants. And that wasn't really, I don't remember that ever being talked about in middle school, so I read it and I didn't really understand why this character Luna wanted to be different. I was on board with the idea of like, okay, so you want to be a girl, but I didn't understand that like you were a girl, you were just trying to become one. You already were Luna. You just had to become Luna. I didn't quite grasp that until later in life, but that was the book that introduced me to the idea that you could feel wrong in your identity and actively seek out to change parts of how you were perceived, to to really explain who you actually are. And that book was actually given to me by a friend, and I'm really glad that I read it because it has still shaped my view on, it made me a more open-minded kind of person reading this kind of thing when I was younger. Because even though the word was never there, the concept was rooted in my mind. So later on in life, it was a lot easier to get on board with all the issues and fully understand where they were because I was already coming from an open point of view. So that is all the books that I have for you today, or at least all the ones that I can remember being really influential in my life. I remember feeling like I read a lot more during that period of my life, but I was still kind of figuring out what I wanted to read and what I wanted to get out of a book. But I hope you guys enjoyed my list, and I'll see you next time. Bye! God, I'm like a Disney Pixar movie. This is gonna be such a revealing list of like my personality and how I've developed as a person. This is such a lighthearted video. What I read in middle school to cripple my humanity. Please don't put this at the end of the video. You're gonna put this at the end of the video.